So welcome everyone to the Town of Richmond Selectboard meeting for Monday, February 26, 2024. This is a public informational meeting. We will not be transacting ordinary, typical select board business. We are here to provide information to the public on three main topics. The vote for the proposed bond issue for the town center, which we're going to lead off with. The second item we'll discuss is the proposal to fund the Conservation Reserve Fund. And then the third and final will be the Town of Richmond budget itself. Of these items, two of them are going to be on Australian ballot, the Town Center vote and the Conservation Reserve Fund. The budget as a whole will be discussed and voted on from the floor. Just wanted to real quick throw out there, because we've had some questions. What would it take to get the budget back on Australian ballot? You may recall that during COVID, the state basically said it will be Australian ballot. They didn't want us having in-person town meetings. And then after COVID ended, we went back to public vote, on the floor vote. There are always concerns about a relatively small number of citizens voting for the whole town. We had 130 people at the last town meeting out of nearly 4,400 people. So there is some interest in making it more democratic by having it Australian ballot voted. But on the other hand, it means that you cannot amend it. You can't vote to amend from Australian ballot. So we have a couple of options if there is a lot of interest. I've encouraged one person who's interested to take up a petition to get it on the town meeting warning for next year. We have an option of, if people wanted to do this, we could either at a town meeting vote to have budgets in the future be Australian ballot, or we could vote to have the question of whether we should go Australian ballot itself be on the ballot, Australian style, so that the whole town would get to choose whether they wanted Australian ballot. We've not taken any steps toward either. That's just the process that would have to happen. It would have to be warned for a town meeting. We do have the option, as we did with moving the town meeting back from Monday night to Tuesday, to hold a special town meeting if there was sufficient interest, so that if there was enough interest, we could be voting Australian ballot for the budget next year. On the other hand, this is possibly just a small number of people who are interested, and maybe the town is always happy. So I'm kind of waiting to see personally if a petition does come forward or not. But for right now, the three items tonight, the first two are Australian ballot, and the third one is on the floor. So Josh put things in this particular order to give the bond vote, which is the most complicated thing, a chance to go first. So I'm going to just pass the floor to Town Center Committee Chair and Select Board Member Jeff Ford to do his presentation.
Okay. Let me share my screen. I, for one, would be really sad. And I'm looking forward to town meeting. I think this is actually going to be one of the more interesting town meetings we've had in a long time. I would be sad to lose that opportunity myself. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to answer questions. This committee has been meeting for almost 5 years now. We've studied the building. We've done a lot of research on what it will take to fix the things that are wrong with it, and we're really committed to being as transparent as possible and to answering as many questions as possible. And so this is one more opportunity. There'll be more opportunities between now and town meeting to ask questions, and we hope we'll see you at some of those opportunities, and I'll explain what those are later on. So first, a little history. The half of this building was built in 1907. The second half of it was built, there's some discrepancy between 1911 and 1914. I think the picture was taken in 1914. What really interests me about this is that shortly after the first half was built in 1908, there was a catastrophic fire that took out the entire commercial block on Bridge Street. Wiped out every business there and several other ones around it. And yet, very shortly thereafter, the folks who lived in town were motivated to invest in a legacy project. This building, which could not have been an inexpensive project at the time, to leave a lasting legacy for us to benefit with, as we still are today. So we are at that crossroads right now. What should the next step be? The reason we're here, well, the history of how this became our town center for municipal purposes was that in the late 80s, the Richmond Elementary School built a new school up by Camel's Hump, and they vacated this building. It was a school up until that point. My son went to kindergarten here in 1987. And the town took a little while to figure out whether they wanted to move in here, but they did wind up moving the municipal services in here. Shortly thereafter, the post office, which used to be in what is now the dentist office down near the railroad tracks, was looking for more space. And the town put in a bid to have them move into the 1953 wing, and that's where they are today. Shortly after that, the Chittenden Supervisory Union Central Office, they moved from the Masonic block into this building, into the third floor of this building, the floor that we're sitting in right now. And they continued renting the space from the 1990s up until 2019. At that point, they moved out, they vacated the space and went to an empty school in Underhill, which left a problem for the select board to try to deal with. Is they formed a committee with two things in mind. One was what to do with this building right now, and what to do. The second question was, how should we house our town services over the long haul? You know, what should we be doing with our town services? And it was an open question whether or not we would be using this building or some other space. But the committee wrestled with all of those questions. What we did first was try to assess what was wrong with the building. We had a building assessment done, which identified a whole bunch of deficiencies in the building. We've discovered more since then. Christine Wernicke, who was on this, she chair? I think she was chair, right? She was chair of the town center committee as well. And she spearheaded an effort to do a visioning process in town to get feedback and input from townsfolk as to what did they want? What did they want to do with this building, and what did they want to do with town services? The committee came up with a list of criteria for the select board to use to prioritize who should be using the empty spaces that were in the building at the time. About a year and a half ago or so, I think, we hired an architectural firm out of Montpelier, Black River Design, to help us develop conceptual plans on what to do, which included whether to build new or whether to renovate this building. And which we decided to renovate this building in large part because that was a less expensive option to us than what we were told, tearing the building down and building new. The committee has also, from the get-go, has been exploring alternative financing mechanisms, grants and various different funds in order to fund this project. And we fully intend to continue doing this if it's a positive vote on Tuesday. And I'll explain a little bit what our investigation on grant funding has been. But what we landed on with that criteria list were the town services, all of the town services, except for the fire department and the highway garage, and the tenants that we have in the building today, including the post office and MMC TV, which are both paid market rates for rent. The post office pays almost $100,000 a year. And then there are various other town organizations and services that that the select board at the time felt that were worthy to use what is vacant space, space that we're not using at the time. This is probably what people are most interested in, is how much it's going to cost, and it's a lot. I have to tell you that the day the architect came in with this cost estimate was not a happy day for the committee. We recognize that it's a lot of money. But for the life of us, we have not been able to figure out how to make it less. So on the left side of this is a simplified version of what the hard cost would be, what you would pay a general contractor to do the construction. And the right side of it are the so-called soft costs of estimates of things we should be keeping in mind that go beyond the general contractor. There's a pretty hefty contingency fund of over $1 million because this is an old building and because you never know what you're going to find when you start opening up the walls. But we felt that that was a reasonable thing to keep in mind. And we also built in a 7.5% inflation adder. And that's because the way we came up with this number is we went through a number of conceptual designs with the architect. The one that we're presenting to you is the least costly one we came up with. They put that conceptual design through a professional cost estimating firm. They used something on the order of 300 different line items to come up with the final construction cost. That was last September. The best case scenario, if there's a positive bond vote on Tuesday, is that we will go into final design to create construction drawings, which will take several months. The earliest construction could start would be late summer, early fall, something of that nature. And so we placed a 7.5% inflation adder on the estimated construction cost to take that into consideration. So that's what comes up to the $9.8 million. Now, we don't have to spend that much. We only have to spend as much as it'll take. It could be that bids come in lower than that. It could be that we find grant fundings for different aspects of the project. We could find cost savings when we do the final construction design that make the overall cost less. But the $9.8 million is the most they could cost. Without going back to the voters to ask for more money. So what we felt was responsible thing to do is to put out what our best guess was, and make sure it wasn't too low because the last thing we would want to do is to come back to the voters and ask for more if you got three quarters of the way through the project and it wasn't enough to finish the project. So it has a significant impact on property taxes. We estimated it's how do I put this? It's not the most expensive option, but there are several different ways of financing it. One way is through the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank. What's funny about them is that with the bond bank, you pay a fixed principal payment and a declining interest payment over time. So the most expensive time, the highest cost year is the first year that you're repaying the bond. And then if you do a 30-year bond, it's about half of that at the end of 30 years, or half of this $96 per 100,000 valuation. Other ways to finance it might be to do more like a mortgage, which would be lower up front, but it would be the same over the period of time. That's a decision for the select board to make if we get a positive bond vote. But the way that the language of the article is up to 30 years and up to $9.841 million. These are some of the other sources we looked at. Some of them are significant. You know, this building flooded 3 times last year. And we think it's eligible for a FEMA mitigation grant. But we haven't applied yet. I mean, there's little point in applying if you don't get the grant. if we're not doing the project, doing that, the flood mitigation parts of the project, that post office roof and flood mitigation, that's at $1.2 million. That's a large part, the major part of the flood mitigation. Most of it is in where the 100-year floodplain hits the building is in the post office, and it floods in a pipe tunnel underneath the post office. And the roof has virtually no insulation. And so if we were to replace the roof, which it needs to be replaced, the membrane needs to be replaced, that's the time to add insulation. And in order to add insulation, we need to reinforce the roof rafters. So I can answer a lot of those questions, but there are a lot of them, Other things that we've tried to do, I'm all about energy. I always have been. I'm really looking forward to applying for a municipal energy resilience program grant. The limit on that is up to $500,000, but that program hasn't been rolled out yet. There's ADA. We applied 3 times, I think it was, to our senators for congressional discretionary spending grant, which is probably better known as an earmark. We applied 3 times. One of those times, we made it onto Senator Sanders' final list, and that was for $1.8 million. We were really excited about that, but it fell off the table in the appropriations machinations. So we will continue to do that going forward. But this is our time. So what we're proposing is a legacy project for future generations, certainly. We're proposing making this building new on the inside with new mechanicals, new windows, and refurbishing. We don't think any part of this project is unnecessary. Maybe with the exception of the green space out front. But that's also really one of the most appealing aspects of the project. So we left that in. But what our intent is to put this out to the voters in every which way we can. We're trying to answer questions at Front Porch Forum. We'll be at the Friday Food Affair coming up this Friday, which I encourage people to go to, not just for us, not just for me, but they're really fun. The Friday Food Affairs are really fun. I'm also giving a tour of the building on Saturday at 10 o'clock. People want to come to that. I'm happy to show folks what we've learned about the building. And I'd be happy to schedule other tours during the week between now and town meeting if people and their friends or neighbors would like to investigate what we've learned. But our intent is to be as transparent as possible and to answer as many questions as possible. And with that, I'll leave it to Q&A.
Yeah, question. There's been a lot of traffic in Front Porch Forum, kind of talking about town center. Do you happen to know if the authors in general have been on a tour of the building, or are they not all that well informed? And you may not know, that's not a fair question, but I'm hoping that anybody that wrote an article, for or against, has at least gone through the tour first.
I think, everybody has a right to their questions. This is a significant investment for everybody. I don't think so. I think most of the questions, my feeling is that this committee has done a really exemplary job of investigating what the problems are and understanding what the solutions are. And there's a lot of information. So I'm not surprised there are a lot of questions. But I think the best way to learn is actually to do a tour, and I really am happy to do that.
I went on a tour and I don't know what the exact adjective is. It's, appalled, maybe astonished or whatever of the basement. I didn't realize it was as new as turn of the century, last century. It didn't look that new. It's solid. That's for sure. That's about all it has going for it. It's damp, it's dark. Yeah. It's pretty rough.
So Jeff, a couple of questions I've seen coming up a lot. These are not my questions because I've been to your presentation, but just for public record, some people are saying, why didn't we spend money on maintenance years ago? And are we spending money on maintenance now? And would we have had to do this if we had? And my sense is that we are spending money on maintenance now, but there were periods in the past where we did not spend enough. Is that your sense?
I would say that this building has suffered from deferred maintenance pretty much for 100 years. You know, many of the things, and the last time that the town invested money in this building was about 30 years ago when we moved in. And since then, very little maintenance has been done. Many of the mechanical systems that went into the building at that time when we moved in are at the end of their useful life. And they're deteriorating. The committee is committed to coming up with a plan for maintenance going forward. We haven't wanted to invest in too much maintenance, you know, because we were preparing a plan that would be total renovation. So you don't want to fix something that you have to rip out, you know, in 2 years. We have done some. We put in the mechanical opening doors for ADA access downstairs. We were shocked and appalled that there was not an alarm system at all in the building, a fire alarm system at all. And so we had that installed because that's important to have, no matter how much time you're going to have left spending in this building before you renovate. But the plan would be to put in all new mechanicals, including electrical lighting, plumbing, sprinklers, fire alarm, you know, all of that, because it really needs it.
I think a piece of advice, I think that's one thing that we should bring out in the presentation because it seems to come up a lot. The other question I've personally been asked is, let's say that my taxes are I have $100,000 value on the grand list. How much my tax is going to go up?
So what we've calculated with that 30-year bond, which starts up high and ends down low, in the first year of the bond payment, it would be $96 per $100,000 for the valuation.
Okay.
That's what we've calculated.
So I have two questions, Jeff. One is, could you remind people what the square footage is? Because part of this is to think about money and square footage. Do you remember offhand? And I know it's in the materials, but just to bring it forth here.
It's about 5,000 feet of floor. So this floor is about 5,000 square feet. The second floor is about 5,000 square feet. The basement is about 5,000 square feet. That will not be able to be used for occupied space because it's below the floodplain. And our floodplain regulations won't allow us to do that. But it still will be able to be used for storage.
So could we say 5,000 plus 5,000 plus the post office?
The post office is about 5,000 as well.
So about 15,000 feet of usable space.
Yes, although, you know, I would argue that with any building, storage space has value.
Absolutely.
And my follow-up question is, you know, just a comment about asset management. So when I look around, I can see clearly that there has been, you know, modest efforts to maintain, like, you know, the ceilings are not 1914 ceilings, right? But when I look at other elements, and these are the costly elements, like, you know, some of the plumbing issues, and in particular windows, having replaced windows in my house one side at a time because of the cost of replacing windows, you know, some of these things are not really maintenance. They are really asset management, significant expenditures for any time you do something, it's big money.
I think that's fair to say. And what the committee realized was that if we were to do this in, you know, one side at a time, for example, replace the windows one side at a time. In the first place, if we replace the windows without the heating and ventilating system has no fresh air ventilation whatsoever. And so if you replace the windows and make those tight without providing fresh air, then you're exacerbating the indoor air quality issues, which are significant in this building. If you were to replace the heating and ventilating equipment without replacing the windows, you'd be heating the outdoors. If you replace the windows at all, it's really a disruptive process. You know, it's really going to make a big mess. You have to change the ceilings. You'd have to do, it would be disruptive to everybody in the building. Our feeling is that the least costly way to do this, and it's not cheap, but it's less costly to do this in one shot than it is to string it out over time, with the construction costs just going up and the disruption being over time. Much greater over time.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one last question and then I see we have at least one hand up. What would happen to the current occupants, like when the first floor is being worked on, where does Linda and all her stuff go?
Linda's probably the biggest challenge.
Mhm.
You know, I'm not sure we know. You know, if we were to build a new building, where would Linda go? You know,
Absolutely.
you know, the vault is a big issue. We have been told that this is an issue for the construction management firm that we hire. We budgeted $100,000 for moving folks out during the time of construction.
Okay.
It's possible that the construction could be staggered. You know, so we do the top floor and the basement without doing the center.
And then we put Linda up here,
Something like that, you know.
little shell game kind of.
You know, there have been some silver linings with the pandemic. One of the silver linings is we learned how to operate remotely from most services. So most of our town staff has been able to operate remotely at different times. We hope that can be worked out in the future. Linda and the town records are.
Okay, I'm going to go to Chris Granda. Chris, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for this presentation. Two questions that I have are, I assume that there would be operational savings from doing the work, reducing the energy costs ongoing. And has there been an attempt to try and you know, if we really sort of look at the investment versus return kind of question, yeah, there'll be the amount extra that we all need to pay in our taxes, but there will be a reduction in the operating costs of the town, which also come out of our taxes, right? So do we have a feel for what that is? I mean, I'm sure that the savings will be less than the additional costs on the bond, but can you ballpark that at all? That's question number one.
Okay, so difficult. It's difficult to ballpark it. What we're spending now, you know, I think it's like $20,000 a year in electricity and $10,000 a year in heat, something on that order. The challenge is that that's with no fresh air ventilation, right? So if we put in a new heating and ventilating system with fresh air ventilation, and you know, with electric heat pumps as the heating source, our electricity bill is going to go up. The heating bills will go down, but it's hard to say how much that'll be. The plan would involve LED lighting, which would reduce our electric load. Heat pump heating system, which would increase our electric load. Eliminating the natural gas boilers, and it would be less than what it would be if we didn't do the efficiency measures. The new windows will reduce the load quite a bit. It's hard to tell how much, but it'll be a lot. The one good thing that we've done over the past 20 years or so is we have done some efficiency projects on the building. The walls have insulation in them. They would have blown in insulation that we put in 15 years ago, maybe. And the ceiling in the historic building has quite a bit of insulation. We've done that twice. And for people who've been here long enough, they might recall the horrendous icicles that we used to have coming off this building that we do not have anymore.
Right.
That's because of air sealing and insulation that we've done. So I don't know if I can answer your question directly, Chris. What I can say is that this building will have a significantly less carbon footprint. You know, how much money it'll save is hard for me to calculate.
And Jeff, because we are not exploring solar on the roof as part of this project, right?
No, what we are doing is we determined that the roof on the historic building can handle solar panels, and it's a relatively new roof. It's put in when Jeff Urbanek was here. One of the last years he was here, I think. The roof on the post office, it cannot support a solar panels at this time because the rafters are undersized. But the rafters are undersized also for any kind of insulation.
Mhm.
I think we determined it has less than an inch of insulation in the roof of the post office. So if, in order to put what would be code level insulation on the post office roof, we have to reinforce the rafters. If we're going to reinforce the rafters, we would reinforce them enough to take the insulation and solar panels on that. And we would hope to be able to finance the solar panels in a different way other than bond.
Right. Reason I ask that is because I had Efficiency Vermont came to my house and did a serious energy audit. And we spent several $1,000s taking advantage of all the recommendations. But between that and putting solar on our roof, our energy bills have dropped like a rock. And a lot of it was, they dropped like a rock even before we put the solar on the roof. I basically only pay for electricity 2 months out of the year.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can I ask the second half of my question?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. And this is in response to some of the things that I've read online as well, is I think that some people have brought up that the town center seems like it will be oversized for the immediate needs of the town. And I'm looking at the printed materials that were distributed. And it does, I guess it depends on how you allocate the space, but was there any thought to a configuration that might involve a rentable apartment or two in a new town, in a refurbished town center building that would generate rent income, in addition to the post office, which obviously already does?
No, we have not considered that. What our charge was to develop a plan to house our town services. What we figured that will take is 1.5 floors, or everything from the police office to the town clerk's office to planning and zoning and the town administrators. That'll take 1.5 floors to do that. The remaining space is now occupied by pretty valuable town services. The senior center, the historical society, MMCTV is they pay market rates right now. And the post office we felt was like very high priority government service, right up there with the town services. And they pay well. They pay $100,000 a year. So we want to keep the post office. The post office is not just about money either. It is an anchor to the commercial district in the village. It's a high pedestrian, high traffic commercial use in town that helps support all of our commercial businesses downtown. And when we surveyed the businesses downtown, this was a very high priority for them to keep the post office here in the village. Housing would be a completely different project, and whether it would be compatible with, say, a police department or the town services, that would be a different question to answer, and we did not explore that.
Thank you.
Chris, I'm going to provide a little further. One thing I've seen on Front Porch Forum is people saying, why are we allocating so much space to a police department that we don't have? I genuinely believe that we will have a fully staffed police department within a year. We have candidates out there right now. If there's one thing that's more frustrating than waiting to open President's and Christmas Day, it is waiting for background checks for police officer candidates to go through. They take a long time because you want to make sure you've done them thoroughly. You don't want to find out that because you were in a hurry, you overlooked something. And so it's a fact of life. But we do have, to be succinct, there are a lot of irons in the fire, but I believe we will have a fully staffed department within a year. And so one thing, if anybody on the call watching now or later has ever been to our police space, it's not adequate for our police department. There's space that can't be used because it's just not suitable. If we were to, and if you were wanting to work here as a police officer and you walk in and look at our current station, you're going to go, because it doesn't convey the impression of a professional department. It looks shabby. And given how hard towns are finding it to recruit police, anything we can do to get ourselves a leg up, like having modern police facilities, I think is also worth having.
Yeah, what I'm excited about is this arrangement that we've been doing with Heinsberg has been working out quite well.
Mhm.
And the one police department, the only police department that I know of anywhere that is fully staffed is the Heinsberg Police Department. The Heinsberg Police Chief has been quite successful at recruiting candidates. And I'm hopeful that he's going to be able to do that for us as well this coming year.
I agree. And that's where the candidates that I've alluded to have come from. It helps to know people, as it were, instead of just putting listings in police newsletters. You know, people they want to work for somebody that they respect and not just a random name in a listing.
Mhm.
Okay, Jeff, we have a,
Question over here in the room. Did you have? a question?
Actually, I have several questions if you don't mind.
anyone would like to come up and,
Sure. Where do you want me to sit? Right here?
yeah, right here, and introduce yourself for the record. Thank you. I did not see your hand go up. I apologize.
My name is Pete Halverson. Some people might know my name, others I've worked with before. I have several questions that kind of all interrelated. Sure. So you had mentioned earlier that the charter or the problem statement that you were given years ago with the select board that you wanted to know what to do with the building and the town services.
Mhm.
And so those seem to have morphed into, one problem statement versus two. Right?
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, when you say it would be more expensive, I've looked through the material online and I haven't seen anything that describes what more expensive means. There's no comparison. There's no other, analysis that I've seen that shows what more expensive means. If you look at what I've shown on the website, you've got approximately 4,500, we said 5,000 earlier, square feet of town services, right? So if you extract those out of the building
Mhm.
and you put them somewhere using commercial costs, it's relatively cheaper to do that.
Mhm. Okay.
It's a different problem on where and how that all works, but it's definitely cheaper. And then you can further look at it from a perspective, if you commercialize the building and you're going to bring in more tenants, right, then there's income to the town. And I don't see any data what that potential might be. Or lastly, what would be the incremental tenant costs that are going to be achieved, and how does that offset the budget costs? They're all kind of together, and I don't know if you want to answer them separately or more generally.
Well, let me see if I can remember all of them. Actually, if I don't get to any of your questions. So as far as our initial charge was to look at both problems. And in the context of this site, one of the advantages to this site, a huge advantage really, is it is not just the name of the building, it is the town center. It is the center of the town geographically.
A little more altruistic, but go ahead. It's kind of altruistic, but go ahead.
It is, but this is something that people told us time and again during our public engagement process. It was important to them, is that the town services be in a central location. It's what the businesses have told us as well, is that the town services help support their businesses with their traffic. If you sit in the parking lot any day of the week, you'll notice how many people come and go from this building. It's quite a few. So that was one thing. I'm getting older. So what was the second question?
Can you describe more, where we said it's going to be just more expensive alternatives,
Oh, okay.
but you
yes,
didn't
yes.
describe, there's no
Yes.
data on your website or presentation that describes what that cost might look like. Because if you look at the cost per square feet, commercial space, then you just extract again the space that we're using for town services, you get one number. What numbers did you look at?
Okay, so what we looked at is we looked at several different alternatives of what to do on this site to meet the needs of our town services. But what we did when we first started is we interviewed all of the occupants of the building. When we hired the architects, what they did is they sat down and they interviewed all of the occupants of the building. And like any construction project, the occupants had much bigger eyes than they had stomach. At one point, we looked at several different options. At one point, one of the options was adding a 4,000 square foot building to the site to accommodate all of the tenants that wanted to be in the space and the specialized services that the police department wanted. There's a thing called a Sally port. I didn't get until this process. Sally port is a drive-in facility where you can take a detainee out of the car in a secure location and put them in a holding cell. So a previous police chief wanted to have that as part of this project. We could not figure out a way to do that that wasn't a lot more expensive. Because the building's up a half a story. So you'd have to build an addition, you build an addition.
It wasn't a formal concept of cost.
So we
comparison.
asked the architect specifically, what would be the difference in cost between tearing this building down and building new?
Yeah, that's not feasible, though. I think, more questions more about what the alternatives would be. One alternative is to tear down the building. That's not really realistic. We want the building. We want the
Right.
building.
So
But
if you
there's
want to,
there's no thought given to displacing the town services and putting them somewhere else. And what would that look like for cost?
our charge was not to do that. And when I think about it, where else could we
It's
do
a
it?
different problem. I agree. It's
You know,
not necessarily an easy one to solve, for sure. There's a number of buildings in the town that are capable and for, the money we're talking about might be interest to them. Who knows?
Could be, it's a different problem than we were given.
Yep.
And I suspect that would take many more years to try to figure out.
Money works pretty fast when you start throwing big numbers around.
We've been doing this for 5 years and it's taken us this long to
Okay,
get.
so you didn't have a formal analysis that you went through.
The architects told us that it would be more expensive to build on this site than it would be
Yep,
to rent.
yep, I would
That was-
expect reasonably so.
That was the formal.
No offsite analysis. And then I didn't see anything published in terms of your tenants. Are we at risk of losing tenants because they're?
None that we currently have.
No, we've been very transparent with the post office. I think they're our most valuable tenant. Thank goodness we have a permanent postmaster now. She's wonderful. She grew up in town here. We had a lot of problems in the past few years of finding a postmaster. We've talked to her repeatedly. She's very supportive of the project. Probably the two biggest challenges to the project is trying to figure out what to do with Linda, and the town clerk's stuff. She's supportive of the project, but it would be a challenge to try to figure out how to do that. The other challenge is working with the U.S. Postal Service. Nobody enjoys doing that I've ever heard of. So they will have to be displaced. They'll have to figure out we'll have to figure out some temporary solution for them during construction. But our presumption is that we want to keep them and that we'll do everything we can to keep them in the existing space.
But we're not planning on moving to a post office in Barry.
I really hope not.
I feel sorry for those people,
Or both, think for that matter.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's
Did
the
those,
question.
did those answer your questions?
They weren't good answers, to tell you the truth, Jeff, but thank you for responding.
I'm doing the best I can, Pete.
I think, yeah.
I'm not trying to be evasive. I'm just answering the questions as best as I can.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, in any project, there are some unknowns. And the committee's tried pretty hard to take care of as many as we can. One thing that I think is laudable is they didn't just take the architect's word for it. They talked to other towns here in Vermont who've done very similar things. And like Brookfield, right? Is Brookfield?
Waterbury, South Burlington.
But the cost per square foot is, you have to kind of.
Right.
Right?
Hartford, right. But the point is other towns have had some of the same, I mean, South Burlington and us don't really compare. But town the size of Hartford, they started with a building
Very similar to this.
very, very similar, and they're done. And so we were able to look and say, what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and hopefully avoid making some of the mistakes they might have made. But we were not going into this just whatever the architects say, we'll sign off on.
They spent something on the order of $5 or $6 million about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. If you've looked at construction costs lately, it's not surprising that it would go up as much as it has.
Yeah, if we knew then what we knew now, we would have acted this 10 years ago. But everything is, I mean, things have gotten more expensive, unfortunately.
Hey,
Lisa, you seem to,
Yeah, and incomes have gone up too, so people don't mention that. They're looking at the cost. So, a couple of questions, Jeff. What amount of ARPA funds are currently being applied towards this, if any?
none.
Zero. Okay, is it allowed?
It can be, yeah.
Okay,
Right now, we've got about $100,000 completely unspoken for.
Right.
The rest is just penciled in for recreation
right.
or for project management for the sidewalk. That ate up some.
Mhm.
But there is 100,000 that if we don't find a reason to spend it on something else between now and December, and if this passes, we could allocate that money to this. Now, that's only $100,000, but it's
Yeah,
still,
it's
still
if it was
something.
my 100,000, it would feel really good to use it that way, but.
Yeah.
well, it remains to be seen how much we're gonna spend on the other projects that haven't been completed yet,
Mhm,
too.
mhm.
That's true.
Right.
And we need to
I
get
asked
those,
for
we
the
need to get
template.
those numbers this year soon.
Yeah.
Because the clock is ticking. We have to allocate the money, as you know,
Right,
by
end of
December
this year.
31st,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
I remain hopeful that some of those grants that Jeff put up there will come through, but that's pie in the sky. We might get none of them, we might get all of them. Ultimately, the way I see it is if we do not act now, we cannot undo the lack of telling the people who were here in 1970, maintain this place, 1980. I mean, that ship has sailed, but we're in a position where a bad enough event could potentially put us in a position of this building being condemned one day. I'm not trying to scoff harm. That's an unlikely situation, but we've had some remarkable events in the last couple of years. So I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I'm just saying it's a pity that we did not maintain this place better back in the day.
And Jay, to that point, I didn't realize until tonight how little of that full amount of time in this building or age of this building has been under town's ownership. And there's been other stewards of the building for 70 years or thereabouts who may or may not have maintained it well. It wasn't our responsibility. And also it wasn't our.
Right. It wasn't our building.
To do
Right.
that, yeah. So some of the things that have shown, lack of past maintenance, coming to haunt you is not on our watch. Of course, it's on our watch because we own it, but now, but the original work wasn't up to the town.
Right. When it was a school, it was the school's responsibility, and schools are not usually bursting with extra money.
Right.
Or
But I'll also note Jeff's observation that these things are related, like HVAC, air quality, windows. So it's not like my house where I could do one side of windows at a time.
Right.
Here it's a more complicated, and how many windows are in this building?
77.
Wow.
So
And they're
my
18
house doesn't
now.
have that many.
I hope not.
they're 8 feet tall and they leak heat like a sieve.
You can take the windows and you can go like that with them.
Right. But in terms of going around this place with a thermal camera at night, the windows just, you have the photos, right?
I've done that, yes.
Yeah.
It's like all lights, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's part of the story is that it's cascading dominoes. Why didn't you do this element of improvement to the building? Because it's related to this other element, related to this other element. One other thing that I think you might address, Jeff, is our proximity to the floodplain and the increasing frequency of floods. I've heard people say, hey, what's the future bring to this building? How do we make it flood resilient? So maybe talk a little more just here vocally about some of the things that you've talked about in the committee about
Sure.
flood resilience.
Sure. So in July, I came down the first and second flood and saw that the floodwaters go about halfway in the parking lot in the back. And the way the post office is built is that the addition was built on top of a tunnel that held the heating pipes, that hold the heating pipes now.
Right.
That tunnel is below the floodplain. there's a hole like that in the foundation where at least some of the floodwaters come in, and it came in July, it came up about a foot or so in the boiler room. Which is the reason why the floodplain regulations require you to move the mechanical room out of a basement in a floodplain.
Mhm.
So one of the flood resilient things we would have to do is move the mechanical room, and that's in this plan. The other is to fill that pipe tunnel, because we would be putting in a new heating system that wouldn't require that. And that would make the basement not fill up with water, you know, unless we got a 1927 flood that came halfway up, you know, the first floor. Not using the basement for occupied space means we could use it for storage, much as we're doing right now. You know, don't want it to cast any aspersions, but the stuff that we're storing down there is extremely valuable to the people who are storing stuff down there. Our community cares camp, the baseball program is storing stuff down there. If it flooded and it got damaged down there, all told, maybe $5,000 worth of stuff. It's not like a lot of stuff. It'd be a big mess, but not a lot of stuff. Anticipating being able to clean the basement out after a flood, and anticipating understanding that is useful, and it's allowed in our floodplain regulations. The one other thing that we're doing is the engineer said there is some concern, I'm not entirely clear on this, but there's some concern that if the whole building gets surrounded by floodwaters, and the ground is saturated, that could create pressure on the foundation from the exterior and compromise the foundation. In order to avoid that, what they are suggesting is to put a relief valve in the floor to allow water to come in.
So,
You know,
Flood it equally.
to stabilize the pressure on the foundation. Another flood mitigation strategy is to allow water to come in through the windows in the basement. You know, that on Esplanade Street, that is a measure that is recommended, is to anticipate the water could come in. The good news about this building is that the building actually starts up half a story. Water's not going to get that high. Water's not going to get into the town office no matter what. So, you know, we can't move the building. Could be moved, but that would be a lot more expensive. So it is what it is. It is where it is. It is what it is. If we want to use this building, if we want to be responsible stewards of this building, we should address, you know, these issues. Addressing these issues are expensive.
Okay. I'm looking to the Zoom. There are quite a few people out there, but no hands up. Is there anybody who was wanting to ask?
And
There is a question in the chat, Andrew.
we have a commitment from the post office. They will move back in afterwards. We have the sentiment of the local postmasters that she would love to do that. We have been in communication with the U.S. Postal Service. Hard to get a call back from them. Everybody I've talked to, I think, try talking to people in Montpelier about talking to the U.S. Postal Service. It's really challenging. That will be one of our challenges going forward. We have a chance. I think they like the space. The people who use it actually like the space. They like where it is and the size of the space. I think they would love to move back in, and there isn't another good alternative. So I think, you know, that we will try really hard to keep them. It's a very high priority for me.
Okay, Lisa.
Jeff, how much, well, let me rephrase that already. We can project our growth of town government and, you know, users a certain distance in the future. You know, the farther out you go, the less meaningful it is. But do we have enough space currently or under the renovation to accommodate our future workforce for say 20, 30 years?
Oh, absolutely. So, we do have rental space. So on this floor, we've got
right.
about a quarter of it is for MMCTV, and we love them, and they've done a really great job for us.
Mhm.
But if push came to shove and we had more staff, there's, and on the last few years, the kinds of additional staff that I've heard discussed
Mhm.
are a facilities manager, right, for all of our facilities. There's been something that's been brought up, it's been brought up through this process.
Mhm.
A recreation director
Right.
is something that's been brought up over the years as being something that might be desirable. It's nothing that this select board is considering at the moment, but it could be something down the road. There is space. What we have told all of the tenants of the building is that, we have leases with all of them that I think they're 1-year leases, aren't they? They're 1-year leases with the understanding that if the town has a need to use that space for some other purpose, we have the right to give them notice. The Historical Society, the Senior Center, for one, they don't take up very much space. Radiate is really highly valued in town. We've heard a lot of support for trying to figure out how to keep radiate in this building. So I think that's a very high priority. But if the first order of business, as we set up our criteria, was for town services. And if the town decides it needs town services, needs to use it for town services, they have the first shot.
That's a good point. I can't think of any place else we would move, if that were available, even where that option would still be available. So it's something in our pocket that's really useful for the future.
So I want to thank everybody for your questions, and Jeff in particular for the presentation. Is everybody ready to move on to the second item of business?
Yeah, and I would encourage people, if they have further questions, please feel free to ask me directly or come to one of
Judy.
our presentations.
Okay. Our second item of business is the proposal to fund the Conservation Reserve Fund by adding 1 cent to the municipal tax rate for the coming fiscal year. Judy Rosofsky from the Conservation Commission is here with us tonight. She's turned her camera on. So Judy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm just going to share a screen. You will bear with me while I do that. And then make this. Everybody move so I can do the slideshow. There we go. Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Judy Rosofsky. I'm the chair of the Richmond Conservation Commission. And the primary purpose of the Conservation Commission is to disperse funds from the Conservation Reserve Fund, which was established in 2005 and used to be renewed every 5 years, but now we've gone to an annual renewal. So that is coming up again. So over the years of this reserve fund, we've funded multiple and diverse projects, and you can find a list of those projects and details about them at the town website. If you go to boards and meetings and you scroll down to Conservation Commission, you'll see some of the things we've done. And this is a visual depiction of a couple of our projects, just showing some of the different things that we can bring to the town. And this is a sort of a visual aid to show you the geographic diversity of our projects, that they sort of take place all over the place. We also try to follow the town plan priorities and support projects that move these priorities forward, including recreational activities and just generally beneficial conservation things. And you can see that if you look at our list of projects. This is also a good investment for the town because at this point, for every dollar that the town has put into the Conservation Reserve Fund, we've gotten almost $4 back. So that's pretty great. We're bringing in outside resources to our town for the benefit of the town. And there are lots of needs, as you all know, from going through the summer and then our sort of December flooding. There's a lot of flood damage, a lot of need to build resiliency into different aspects of the town. Winooski River has some erosion issues that we'd like to address, ongoing work at the Andrews Community Forest. And there's lots of projects, and this is a good time for me to remind everyone in the town that anyone can apply for Conservation Reserve funding. And you can go to our website. If you scroll way down to the bottom, you'll see a file that includes the application for Conservation Reserve funds. These pictures were so great, I just had to show them, but these are some of the projects. Gillette Pond was a big one that we've done recently, and thanks to all the folks who helped with that. And then Caitlin Littlefield has really spearheaded the Emerald Ash Borer work, and John Cart did the tree planting that was so great and involved so many students. So lots of cool stuff going on. The actual wording is, shall the town of Richmond vote to approve funding the Conservation Reserve Fund by adding 1 cent to the municipal tax rate in the 2024-2025 fiscal year, which will be voted on by Australian ballot. So rather not a show of hands, but an actual ballot. So that's what's coming up. And if you have any questions, I bet there's a few minutes you could ask anything now, or you can email me later. And you can, I put the website so that you can go directly to there if you would like.
Okay.
All
And
right.
Judy, I believe Art has a question.
Sure.
I wanted to note this, Judy, because it came up in our conversations at the select board's discussion of town budget, that of
Mhm.
course, the value of 1 cent on property values represents more money over time. And I just wanted to note that because that was a conversation as part of our budget building exercise, that as people's property taxes went up or their valuations went up, then 1 cent on the rate generates some modest amount of additional fund.
Thank you, Bart. Yes, that is quite true.
Are there any questions here in the room?
I'm going to reserve my question.
Okay.
For town meeting.
Okay. Any questions from anybody online? Okay, seeing none. Judy, thank you so much. We will see you at town meeting.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Okay, and our third article, or our third item of business for tonight is the overview of the proposed 2024-2025 budget, which I will leave to Mr. Josh Arneson.
Yep, thank you. So I've got a presentation that I'll walk through, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll be ready for any questions for this evening. Just a reminder that this is going to be voted from the floor next Tuesday at town meeting. This is not an Australian ballot item. So this is for the 2025 fiscal year municipal town budget. Okay, where was this? There we go. So today's agenda, we're going to start with an overview of the budget, followed by a review of municipal operations, a review of the Conservation Reserve Fund, which Judy already went through a nice presentation on, a review of social services and how voting on them differs this year, a review of reserves and unassigned and restricted funds, a review of the debt service, a review of the budget by department, and then pause for questions at the end. First, I'd like to go over a fiscal year explanation just to make sure that we're all on the same page with what fiscal years we're talking about. The previous fiscal year was FY23, which began on July 1st, 2022, and ran to the end of June on 2023. Fiscal year 24 is the budget that we're currently in that started this past July 1st and will end on June 30th, 2024. And the budget that's being voted on is for fiscal year 25, which will begin on July 1st of this year and end on June 30th of 2025. You'll note that at the top of some of the slides, I added in pages. So these are page numbers that you can reference into your town report. So the budget is on page 11 through 21 of the town report. So anybody who would like to follow along can do so hopefully easily with the page numbers.
Mentioned that they're available for pickup in the hall in the foyer.
Yep, they're available for pickup in the foyer. Anybody in the room, I've got a few extra behind you there. And they're also available online under the department heading of town clerk. There's all the budget related information and all town meeting related information there. So the tax rate presented here and all estimates that follow are based on the grand list value as of July 2023. There will be some adjustments to the grand list between now and then when the select board sets the final rate in FY25. Spending is up from FY24 by about $211,000. That's 4.58%. By section, the general fund is up about $100,000. The highway fund is up about $111,000. Overall, the tax rate increase is projected to be 5.10 from FY24 to FY25. So that increase will look like a tax rate of 0.4682 in FY24 to a 0.4921 in FY25, which is 0.0239 increase per $100,000 of property value. That's where we get our 5.1% increase in the tax rate. So what does that look like for actual money from individual property owners? So $100,000 will go up, if you have property valued at $100,000, it will go up $23.88 per year for every $100,000 of property value. So if you have a $400,000 property, that's $95.52 for the year. Here's a look at, this is the municipal portion of the tax bill. So if you look at a $400,000 home, the current tax rate is $1,872. It will go up about $96. And that will give you a new total tax rate of $1,968. This is also a reminder here that the projected school and town tax rates for FY25, the town tax rate is only 29% of your projected FY25 taxes. The remainder of 71% is from the education tax. They look at town budgets. As you can see, they've modestly increased from 2011 to 2025, sort of a fairly even slope there. The one anomaly in FY23 relates to how we valued reserves and expensive reserves. That year, we had about $755,000 that were being spent from reserves and unassigned and restricted funds to pay for things like a fire department brush truck, police reserves for the police cruiser. We had a reappraisal that was happening there as well. We also used some money for dump truck, bucket loader, and excavator. All those were put into the town budget with offsetting revenue from unassigned funds, restricted funds, and reserve funds. Since then, we've modified the way we utilize, especially the reserves. So you'll see that that budget came down a little bit. So if you take those out, that curve actually flattens out quite a bit, and that explains the slight increase in 23. This is a look at the budgets by department. As you can see, highway is one of the more expensive departments, taking care of all the roads and transportation infrastructure in town at about 41%, followed by administration and police, fire, and then we have library, planning, zoning, contracted health, social health services, the assessors, and recreation. But you can see departments like highway and police with a little more infrastructure and equipment tend to weigh a little bit heavier on the budget. Now we'll get into a review of municipal operations. So this is essentially what the core budget is paying for. In the administrative offices, we have the full-time town manager, the finance director, town clerk, and assistant town clerk, who's a part-time employee. We also have a 30-hour per week assistant to the town manager. All of the administrative functions operate very closely to manage revenue, payments, payroll, policies, and projects. The police is budgeted for one full-time chief, 4 full-time officers, and 1 part-time administrative assistant. Please note, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, that this budget calls for a chief to be shared with Heinsberg, and that's how we built the budget. Rather than a full-time chief on staff with Richmond, we budgeted for an allocation to be spent to share that chief with Heinsberg, which is the current operation for about the last 5 or 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
In the fire department, the department consists of 1 chief, 1 assistant chief, 3 captains, a lieutenant, and 14 firefighters. It's an all volunteer department. However, they are paid for trainings and responses to incidences. Planning and zoning, we have a full-time director of planning and zoning and a full-time zoning administrator. They're involved in issuing permits, reviewing and rewriting zoning regulations, staffing the planning commission and the DRB, as well as staff to other committees related to planning, such as the housing committee. Highway and Recreation has one full-time foreman, one full-time assistant foreman, and 4 full-time drivers and operators. In the winter, you hear them out there early in the morning, plowing the roads, maintaining their equipment, and planning their summer work. In the summer, they're very busy on gravel road maintenance, maintaining equipment, highway drainage work, maintaining recreational facilities, larger sidewalk and stormwater projects. The library includes a full-time director, a full-time assistant director who each work 32 hours per week, 6 part-time employees, 1 part-time substitute employee who's able to fill out when needed. It's governed by the Board of Trustees, but the voters do approve the budget at town meeting. Water Resources Department is not included in the budget that's voted on at town meeting. This will be voted on separately at the annual meeting for water and wastewater, which will happen in May. That's voted on by the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners. They'll begin working on that budget in the next couple of weeks, take a couple of months to build that budget and rate structure, and then present that to the customers, and the commission will vote on that. That department services about 500 accounts, mostly located in the Richmond Village. It consists of a superintendent and 3 full-time staff members. And as we mentioned, that budget will be voted on in May. So this budget is not included in any of the information we will review this evening and is not being voted on at town meeting. Now we're going to get into a couple of things that are not included in the budget, but are on for separate articles at town meeting. As we just saw, the Conservation Reserve Fund is voted on annually by Australian ballot. And the question is whether to approve a contribution to the Conservation Reserve Fund of 1 cent on the tax rate in FY25. So this was not included in the tax rate projections that we reviewed earlier in the presentation. The estimated contribution to the reserve fund would be $78,162 based on the July 2023 grant list of $7,816,261. If the article passes, the actual reserve fund contribution will be based on the new grant list value, which will be published this coming spring and summer. $78,162 added to the budget will increase the estimated tax rate from 5.10 to 7.24. So what that would look like is it's basically a $10 increase for every $100,000 of property value. So if you have a $400,000 property, your tax rate would go up an additional $40 to fund the Conservation Reserve Fund. So there you would see your current tax rate at $400,000 home is $1,872. The budget increase plus the Conservation Reserve Fund would add $136. So your new municipal tax bill would be $2,008. Now we're going to also talk about social services and allocations. In previous years, all social services and charitable appropriations were included in the budget and voted on at town meeting as the budget was voted. But we were informed by case law and statute from the attorneys that the town was advised that social service appropriations should be voted on separately by the voters by voice vote at town meeting. So social services are defined in statute as such programs include, but are not limited to, transportation, nutrition, childcare, medical care, and other rehabilitative services for persons with low incomes, senior citizens, children, disabled persons, persons with a substance use disorder, and persons requiring employment to eliminate their need for public assistance. Requests that do not fit into that statutory definition of social service could not be included in the budget if they cannot be categorized as something else, or sorry, they're able to be added into the budget if they are categorized as something else, such as recreation or police services. So the requests that were considered by the select board to be recreation related that were moved to recreation and trails in the proposed town budget are an allocation to the Lake Iroquois Association, a request from the Richmond Community Band, a request from the Richmond Farmers Market, Camel's Hump Little League, and Halloween on the Green. The select board looked at these as items that benefit the town as a whole, but aren't necessarily by strict definition in statute, a social service. But they do provide a benefit to the town as a whole in recreation. Requests that were considered by the select board to be police related were moved to the police department in the proposed budget. The Chittenden Unit for Special Investigation is something that we've always funded under the Social Services Department, but this is now being moved to Police Department as it really serves a police function to assist with special investigations. Requests that were not considered by the select board to be donations, but do have a contractual obligation were moved to contracted social services in the proposed town budget. This includes special services for or SSTA, so Special Services Transportation Agency. This section also includes community outreach and the Williston Community Justice Center allocation. Both of those do tend to be more towards policing, but also a little bit wider than that too. So community outreach can be used for police as well as anybody in town who has a need for their services. Other requests that were health services added to the town budget were Richmond Rescue and UVM Home Health and Hospice. Again, not specifically social services, but provide an important health service to the town. And then there were requests that were considered to be related to the administration of the town, removed the town administration in the proposed budget. This included the Greater Burlington Industrial Corporation, which is helpful in securing funding for some projects, and MMC TV, which is extremely helpful in publicizing videos of most of our committees in town. And then there was one request that was considered by the select board to not be a town or not to be a social service, and also didn't really fit into benefiting the greater good of everyone in town. And that was a request by the Boy Scouts Troop 23. So that's not included in the budget or on the separate social services. So this year's allocation to social services that are included in the warning for a vote at town meeting. So those are going to be voted individually. There's 8 of them. They'll be voted by voice vote at town meeting. They're not included in the budget as presented. If they all pass as warned, it will add $16,760 to the budget. This should be an increase of $2.14 per $100,000 of property value. So knowing that they're separated out into 8 different requests, I tried to drill down a little bit further. Every $10,000 that's added to the budget is an extra $1.28 per $100,000 in property value. And as you look at some of these requests, they're $500 to $1,500. So every $1,000 is added to the budget is 13 cents per 100,000 in property value. So just some perspective to keep in mind as we vote on these at town meeting. Now we're going to get into talking about reserve funds and unassigned and restricted funds. So a basic overview of this is reserve funds act like savings accounts. They're typically used for larger capital purchases or projects, and they have specific names for the funds and specific uses, and they're planned for both the expenditures and the contributions to the reserves are, for the most part, planned by the select board and by the town during the budgeting process. Unassigned and restricted funds are essentially surplus funds that are left over at the end of a fiscal year. If those funds are from the highway department, so for instance, if the highway department has excess revenue or is underspends its expenses, any of those excess funds remain is what we call restricted funds. They can be used for anything highway related, but cannot be transferred out of the highway budget to anything else. Unassigned funds is any excess funds in any other department, and then they can be used for any other department, including highway. So if there is vacancy savings in the police department, and that creates $200,000 extra at the end of the year, that money could then be used for any other department. It doesn't have to stay with police, similar if it's library or administration. So reserve funds function like savings accounts. Funds can be added to the reserves yearly from a tax revenue, and amount is decided by you, the voters. Reserves can also be funded with non-tax revenue, such as the Town Center Maintenance Fund, which is funded by rent payments from the town center. And the reappraisal fund is funded by the state's Act 60 reappraisal grant, where the town receives money annually to go into that fund, which that helps pay for reappraisals, which we just had last year. Reserves are used mostly for large capital purchases. The actual use of the reserve fluctuates based on the capital plan and emergencies that fall outside of the scope of budget, which might cause us to use reserve funds mid-budget season. This is a look at reserve balances as of the end of last fiscal year, so on June 30th, 2023. This chart is a bit skewed, as you see the ARPA line there on the far left. That is $1.2 million that we received from the federal funds for ARPA. So I took that out just to look at our more traditional reserves, and that allows you to see a little bit more of where the funding is. You can see though on the left, there's about 8 funds that comprise most of the money. And we're going to get to that here. I'll get a little bit better in a second. This is a look at the total balance of reserves over the last about 10 years. We have increased those. We've also increased the number of reserves over those years. Just to note, this does not include ARPA, Cemetery Fund, Edmunds Trust, or the Shawnian scholarships. We don't have the historical data on that. So this is really our main operating reserve funds. 89% of our reserves are in just 8 accounts. You can see that ARPA leads the way with $1.2 million. However, that has a definite sunset on that at the end of this year. Bridge and culverts is about $381,000. Conservation at $266,000. Town center maintenance at $255,000. Record restoration at $196,000. Cemetery fund at $171,000. Fire department reserve at $162,000, and highway reserve at $118,000. This year or in FY25, we're planning on use out of the reserve funds based on our capital plan. Again, these are not offset with expenses in the budget, so these are included in the town report on page 22. Under fire safety equipment reserve, we're planning on $3,000 for air tanks, $10,000 for turnout gear. Highway capital reserve, we have a $52,000 expense for a Ventrac tractor and $40,000 from the guardrail reserve for Southview. The library reserve has $20,000 allocated for a boiler, $15,000 for flooring, and $15,000 for lighting in the library building. Now we'll get into a bit of the budgeted contributions to reserves, because this is driving some of the increase in the overall expenses on the budget in FY25. The fire capital reserve has a contribution of $220,000. The next big purchases here are the reserve rescue truck with deposit in FY26 and the balance due in FY27. One thing to note as we start to look at the increasing contributions to reserves is that our capital plan over the last couple of years has really transitioned away from using loans and more into paying for equipment from fire trucks to plow trucks with cash, thus avoiding large interest payments, which have totaled over $1 million in the last several years as we've taken out many loans. So we have a need to increase contributions to capital reserves now to end up paying for those items down the line and avoiding getting loans. Highway capital reserve has a contribution of $218,000. The next purchases are Ventrac tractor in FY25, a dump truck in FY26, a pickup truck with a plow, and a Kubota tractor, also all scheduled for FY26. So again, putting money away now to purchase things over the next couple of years. We also have a new reserve called the Highway New Transportation Infrastructure Reserve. This was created and funded at $25,000 to pay for new transportation infrastructure, such as new sidewalks. There's currently a reserve for sidewalks that's used primarily for repair of existing sidewalks. So the work that the highway crew did on Bridge Street for the sidewalk last summer, that came out of that reserve. This is for new sidewalks that might be built that are not already existing. So one project that's coming up on the horizon is the intersection of Bridge Street, Bridge, Cochrane, Huntington, and Thompson Road. There's some ideas in the works for how to reconstruct that intersection to make it a little bit more safety friendly and user friendly. Money would come out of this new transportation infrastructure reserve to help pay for that project. We'd also leverage any other bonds, any other grants that might be available for that type of project as well. Now we'll transition from reserve funds into unassigned and restricted funds. So as we talked about earlier, these are a combination of underspending and good revenue, i.e. a surplus that reverts to unassigned and restricted funds. Restricted funds are designated specifically for the highway department and can't be used for any other department. Unassigned funds may be used for any town expense, including highway expenses. These balances can increase in the following ways. We'll get reimbursements from FEMA that were received for expenses that were included in a prior fiscal year. So that's unexpected revenue in a current fiscal year. Underspending on budgeted expenses, such as when a department has vacancy savings due to being short-staffed. And sometimes grants will be received for budgeted items, reducing budgeted spending. The auditors have advised that about 15% of the annual budget is a healthy amount to have in unassigned and restricted funds. These savings greatly help when you have unanticipated crisis or when cash flow is needed. So for instance, we had about $400,000 plus in direct expenses to the flooding this last July. Having the unassigned and restricted funds was very helpful to be able to fund those expenses without having to go out to a bond or to an emergency loan. In November of 2023, the Select Board adopted the fund balance policy, which actually puts a limit on unassigned and restricted funds to be only 15% of the budget. Anything over 50% must be used for emergencies or put toward the next budget to be reduce the amount of taxes that is raised. So the fund balances at the end of last fiscal year, with unassigned funds of about $922,000, restricted funds of $708,000 for a combined total of $1.6 million. That actually represented 35% of the $4.6 million FY24 budget. So I look at it as at the end of one fiscal year, we had 35% of unassigned and restricted as we headed into the next budget. This is a look at where our unassigned and restricted have been over the last number of years. As you can see, it's climbed considerably up to 2022, peaking at about 1.7, almost $1.8 million. At the end of FY23, that dropped to $1.6 million. As a percentage of budget, we used to be around that 15%, from 12 to 14. It climbed up to 25% for a while, and now we've been up at around 35%. Even though every year the board has put more and more of this money back into the budget, every year we've seen other expenses come, or I'm sorry, underspending on certain things. It's been the police department the past couple of years, or we've received money from FEMA from previous disasters that has increased our revenue. So what the board did about that this year, as we look into the budget, we looked at ending with about $1.6 million at the end of FY23. Budgeted expenses or budgeted use of restricted funds in FY24 is $500,000. That was included in this year's budget to offset the tax rate. So that's going to reduce that $1.6 million by $500,000. We had unbudgeted expenses in July, which was the July flood, of about $468,000. So that reduced the amount that we have on hand. We also had unbudgeted revenue from FEMA from the Halloween flooding of $159,000. This was due to a mitigation project that took a couple of years after that initial flooding in 2019 to complete. I think that was completed in 2022 or 2022, and then we received the money here in 2023. So that's additional revenue that we didn't have on hand. Once we closed that project out, there was a state match of $42,000 that came in for the entire it came in for all the damages from the Halloween flooding, and also some additional money from FEMA for $4,400. So all told, there are about $200,000 in unbudgeted revenue. Project interest, we also looked at interest received over budget. We have about $136,000 that we projected that we'll receive in FY24 over a budgeted amount of $14,000 in interest. This is largely due to some certificates of deposit that we've purchased, as well as higher interest rates in general on our savings. And the vacancy savings in the police budget is projected to be at least $150,000. So we added all of those back in, and we sort of came up with a projected for the end of FY24 of combined restricted and unassigned funds of $1.1 million. The total FY25 budget expenses are $4.8 million. So keeping with our policy, 15% of the FY25 budgeted expenses is $722,000. In order to reduce that 1.1 million down to 722,000, we need $433,000 to be reduced from that. So that is $433,186 has been added in to offset the tax revenue needed in FY25. That will now get us down to 15% of the FY25 budgeted expenses that we'll have on hand going into FY25. Jay, do you have a question?
I do.
Yeah.
Could you go back one slide?
Sure.
So there are obviously going to be questions about why are we going up? Why will the tax rate be going up by 5%? Had we not had the flooding, the $468,266 you see there could also be used to offset taxes.
Absolutely. And then we'd be closer to flat, if not a negative rate.
Right. So our goal is to keep taxes going up as much as possible. And we try not to budget excessive. We try to budget as accurately as possible, but there will always be, for example, the interest received. we have $136,000 because our investments did very, very well.
Compared to
That,
budget.
right, and on the police budget, we discuss, people have asked, why do we fund a full police department when those positions sit empty? We discussed during the last budget cycle, do we want to budget as though we're gonna have a fully staffed department, or would you want to budget for less than that? We're trying to hit that sweet spot where we're as accurate as possible. It's just the nature of the beast that you never hit at the end of the year. You never have spent every penny you budgeted. It just doesn't work out that way. But had we not had the flood, the tax rate would have been flat. So we will be getting hopefully some FEMA reimbursement
Yeah,
for that 468. Just we won't be getting it now.
we won't be getting it in this fiscal year, but we will get it. And that's where then we'll have down the line, we'll have more
We'll have
money
a little
coming in,
right.
and then all of a sudden our unrestricted will go up higher.
Pending another flood.
Pending another flood.
Exactly.
But
Which
we
is
put-
why we keep the 15% on hand for cash flow. And if we have another flood and we need that money immediately.
Right. But I just think it's worth bringing out that people go, did you work as hard as you could to try to avoid raising taxes? And we did. We tried very hard to keep the tax increase at 5% or less. We didn't quite make less. But had it not been for the flood, even though health insurance has gone up, even though salaries have gone up, the tax rate would have been more or less flat.
I got a few more here when we get to the,
Yeah, I just wanted to call that out because
well, I'm almost done, so
Yeah.
we can,
Right on what he's talking about. Go ahead.
and then we can circle back. So, that was a good and important segue though. Quick review of town debt. This sheet actually used to have about 3 or 4 more loans on this. So as we've worked to reduce loans have fallen off. We haven't added more. So you see, we have a 2005 fire truck, which will be completed in 2026. We pay about $10,000 per year. Another fire truck, which will be completed in 2026 at $50,000 per year. A dump truck, which its last payment will be this coming fiscal year at $1,900. A larger bond for improvements to Jericho Road that has quite a few more years left on it at $57,000 a year. And a stormwater project on Millage Street that again goes out to 2032 at $7,000 per year. Now I'm going to go over some budget by department, and I promise that probably only got about 5 to 7 minutes left, and then we'll open it for questions. So first of all, looking at changes that affect multiple departments, all salaries were reflected at current staffing levels, including a step on the pay grid and that pay grid going up by 3%. Health insurance increased in the calendar year 2024 by 12.8%. The town pays 90% of employees' health insurance rates, and the employees pay 10%. So that affected all departments across the board. In administration, we have an increased contracted services from $3,000 to $10,000. To $13,000 to pay for a single audit, which is required when the town spends $500,000 in federal funds. We've decreased the contracted grounds maintenance by $15,000 from $50,000 to $35,000 to better reflect the actual cost of mowing town-owned properties. We've offset community well-being with $5,000 in reserves funds from the opioid settlement reserve. The police department is budgeted to include 4 officers paid by Richmond and a contracted chief with Heinsberg. We also did not budget for any new police cruisers, and we actually sold 2 cruisers this past fiscal year to try to better manage our police cruiser fleet. The library department, we offset the technology public use room expenses with technology public use room fees, and this is to transition away from a reserve fund where those fees used to go and better offset our expenses. Charitable appropriations, as we talked earlier, all items here have been moved to other sections of the budget, but you'll notice on page 17 of the town report, we still have a historical, view of them where they used to be under charitable appropriations, just to make sure that we keep the historical look accurate at previous budgets. Contracted social services. We added the Williston Community Justice Center, funded at $15,840. This was a request from Williston, which had been footing the entire bill for the Community Justice Center. And this is an allocation based on population of towns of Williston, Heinsberg, and Richmond, and this is our share of the $72,000 that it takes to operate that Justice Center after the grant funding from the Department of Corrections. In highway, we increased the center line paint and shoulder of $21,000 from $7,000 to $28,000 to pay for fog lines on Hinesburg Road, Cochrane Road, Huntington Road, and East Hill Road to try to improve traffic safety on those roads. And we created a reserve for the new transportation infrastructure, which we talked about earlier, and funded it at $25,000. On the revenue side, we did increase the net interest on general checking account to increase from $86,000 from $14,000 to $100,000 due to utilizing certificates of deposit and higher interest rates in general. As you noted, we had a lot more interest over the budget in this year, so now we're trying to budget for more of that. That also helps to offset the tax rate increase for FY25. And as promised, hopefully that was less than 7 minutes, and we're at the end. I know it's a long presentation, so thanks for bearing with me.
I want to put your name. Hi, Pete Halverson again. I just have one question I want to ask. If the town center ballot is accepted or approved, is that gonna start in 26, 27? What is that anticipation?
So what the hope is, is that the design will happen as soon after town meeting as we can do it. The design will take a few months to be able to create construction documents that can then go out to bid. If there's are successful bids that come in within budget, we would hope to start in late summer, early fall. It takes 6 months to a year to do the project.
Those detailed line items are not in the budget today.
They are not.
They're not forecasted, right?
Not. It's hard to tell. The construction
Yeah.
industry right now is
Okay.
like insane.
The other ask I have, Josh, I know you're a busy guy, but since the reappraisal, I'm not sure how many $100,000 properties we have left in Richmond, but I
Yeah.
know there's a lot more above 400,000.
That's right.
Maybe you can just add a few more lines in those tax increase tables.
Yeah, I could probably add 500,000. I do the 100,000 just because it's easy for people to be like, well, mine's 6, so 6 times that. But yeah, maybe I'll do like a 500,000 because you're right. It went up quite a bit.
I think, I'm sorry, but I think Pete's point, you could keep going because there are a lot of $700,000-$800,000 properties. Then
Okay.
a lot more than there used to be.
Yeah, I could
Does that seem
do
fair?
like a 1, a 5. Yeah, okay.
There's value in having the $100,000 line item.
Because you can
It's
multiply.
It's easy. math.
I can change my intervals though. I could do like 100.
250, 500, 750.
That's probably right.
Chris,
Yeah, hi. Josh, I just had to, it struck me when I was looking through the budget in the town report that it looks like between fiscal year 2023 and 2025, for most departments, with the major exception of the police department, the projected increase in salary costs is between 30 and 35% over that 2-year period. And I understand, what's happening with healthcare costs. That's always a challenge. But for that seems like a high rate of increase projected for total salary costs. I was wondering if you could address that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that is driven by a compensation study that was completed in 2022. And at that time, we looked at compensation of all town employees and made adjustments as we headed into the FY23 budget based on that feedback from the compensation study, which really was a comprehensive look at all town employees, job descriptions, and comparables to comparable communities that we had a third-party firm review for us. And then we ran that through also looking at Chittenden County towns, had many robust discussions with the select board and water and sewer department to figure out where do we want to place on this schedule to make sure that we're compensating fairly. But that's probably explained most of that jump.
if I could add to that, police was one area in which we'd fallen drastically short. We actually did a second bump when we realized how short we were. But there were other, just for the sake of being able to retain our employees, increases in other departments. It had been pointed out to us that pretty much any of our highway department employees could go elsewhere and with their current training and licensing and start making $2,000 more just the very next day. And that loyalty to the town is great, but at some point, loyalty doesn't pay the bills. And so the compensation study really did look across the board at, are we paying the market rate? Are we paying, in some cases, better than the market rate so that we're not instantly in a position to have to start catching up again?
Well, I applaud the select board for doing that kind of work, and I think it's important for the reasons that you say, but the question that I'm asking is looks like you're projecting that those kinds of increases will continue into the future for several years. So what I'm hearing is that that deficit in the salaries of town employees has not been corrected completely.
No, no, so looking back so the big bump was, I think, into the FY 23 or 24 budget. And then what we did in last spring, 2 springs ago, I guess, it was when we looked at the pay grid, and we looked at current cost of inflation, we adjusted that grid by, I think it was 5 or 6% 2 springs ago, based on the current inflation. So we had that grid that we got from the compensation study, adjusted that up by about 6%. And now this coming spring, we'll look at that grid again and figure out how do we want to adjust that. This budget's built on a 3% increase in that grid. That actual rate will be set though when we get towards about May or June, and we get into annual increases, which happen on July 1st. We also budgeted for every employee to go up 1 step on that grid, but we'll be looking at real-time data this coming spring at that. There have been some changes between the 24 and the 25 budget, kind of based on hiring within that year as well. So if we hired an employee who had more experience into a higher position, then that is going to be budgeted for their increases.
This is Bard, Chris. I'll just note, and I think Chris is aware of this, that there are bumps with a small number of employees when people either avail themselves or do not avail themselves of health insurance.
Right.
Like if you go from no health insurance to a family health insurance plan, that looks like a significant cost change for a single employee.
Yeah, though, again, this is all, what I'm looking at is the projection, and I guess that's not something that we can project, correct?
Who's on or off health insurance?
Right.
Right. No, that's kind of a personal choice each fall as that's open enrollment.
But we have seen actual changes
Yes.
in
Yeah.
positions from year to year.
Okay, Jeff?
So I would make 2 points. One is the reason that we're doing this is to retain and recruit employees for our services. I would point out that there are other towns are really struggling with this. I know that Heinsberg lost most of their highway department last year because of for whatever reason, but it's been increasingly difficult to recruit. And we learned how important it is to have a fully functioning highway department this year. The other thing that we did at the same time that we did the compensation study increase is we went from paying 100% of health insurance costs to paying 90% and asking for a 10% contribution from the employee. So the employees understood that. They understood that there was going to be a bump in their salary and that it seemed fair to all involved that they pay for a portion of their health insurance costs too, which have gone up, continue to go up astronomically.
People in the room, any questions? Lisa?
Not so much a question, but I was looking, the $400,000 house assessed at that, our tax increase, proposed tax increase this year amounts to 26 cents a day. So it's not a lot. Just put a quarter in the door, the jar by the door.
Well, that 26 a day is a lot to somebody who is barely making ends meet.
Also true, yeah. It's small.
But every dollar is a lot of money to somebody. So I just, it could have been worse. If circumstances had been right, it could have been a lot better. Unfortunately, Mother Nature had her opinion about that.
And that's,
But I just never want to be too glib about taxes. We should, money is money, and some people can afford it more than others.
One thing that I would encourage you to relabel is we have community outreach. Nobody knows what community outreach is. Putting in, anytime you have community outreach, put in Howard Center and maybe explain what that is. Those are mental health services that are available to everybody in town at any time. and that we pay for that service.
And it's not entirely mental health. I mean, that is the main focus, but community outreach is also available for things like, I need rental assistance, I need heating assistance, and they can hook you up with available programs.
So it's a social services, program that we pay for and is frankly is underutilized.
Right. The statistics for what it's worth are on the town's website. Where did you say that you showed me
They're under the police website.
Okay, so if you were to just for fun, do you want to jump to the,
Yeah, I'll get there.
see, I did not know until very recently that the stats were actually on our website. So
This, I'll find it.
I just would like to,
Yep, I'll get there in a second. Just give me a second to pop out of this.
I know that they've been having difficulty staffing as well. The Howard
Yeah.
Mental Health has been having difficulty staffing. They have difficulty serving the ring communities in Chittenden County.
So if you go to departments and police,
there we
the
go.
outreach, and here's all the data from previous fiscal years and the first couple of quarters of fiscal year 23. Or annual report.
Actually, we do have the whole year.
We have the
Well, Q4 is there
2023.
to the left there.
Oh, sorry. Well, no, we have the 2023 full annual report.
Okay, right.
And the Q4.
So just for granted, show them the
Okay.
show them the Q4.
Sure. So this is just the last 3 months of quarter four. So you pulled the June. of
Okay, so
2023.
this is all,
It's all of them.
but I think we've
This
got
is-
the Richmond
Yeah,
numbers
there's
on the next.
Richmond down here, which without a police department, ours is a little bit lower that time of year, but this breaks it down. And I know they're trying to drill in and provide a few more details on this because it's pretty high level. I mean, I'd like to know more like, well, what was initiated by police, what was initiated by town call-ins, and I think that they're trying to drill into that right now. But this is a basic 2-page report that we do get that shows activity.
They have a new hire. They have a new community outreach coordinator who's going to be whose office is going to be in Williston.
Okay.
And they are looking at expanding their services in this
Great.
area.
Right, and I have been yelling at them politely for years about how hard it is to find information about community outreach on the Howard Center website. And they have recently redesigned their website to make it a little bit easier, but you still kind of have to know that it exists to go looking for it. From time to time, I post a front porch forum what it is. I sometimes think it'd be nice if we could afford, they have magnets that you can put on your fridge for first call, which is the crisis line. But sometimes I think it might not be a bad idea to invest in community outreach magnets because we're paying for them. We're paying for these services. And other towns, you clearly see, are making use of them. It's a shame when people aren't making use of something we've already paid for.
So I would argue that those numbers can and probably will go up.
As we have a
We haven't had a fully staffed police department for a
Oh, wow.
long time, and that's not the only place, but it's one of the,
Right.
the primary entry points.
Yep. But yeah, no, good feedback on the presentation. I'll make sure I add that in for next week. Thanks. And if there's anything else that people think I could have added in or done better, please let me know. I'm always looking to make it better for the big show next Tuesday.
Well, for me, the thing that's the most important thing about this is people go 5% plus a bond vote. Is that the 5% would be more or less flat had we not had the floods.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we have no way of knowing if we're going to have another 100-year flood or two. I mean, as Bart is fond of saying, I don't think this is a direct quote, but big floods are the new normal. And we can't just say that was an outlier.
Peter says that too.
You know,
It's gonna happen again.
and the flood mitigation efforts, there's money out there for flood mitigation. There's things we can do for flood mitigation, but we can't magically not have so much of the town on the floodplain. It's going to be there. We can, I'm not going to go down the whole thing, but there are things we can do. Chris.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is the third time today I've been in a meeting where someone has talked about the new normal. I think the problem is we're used to thinking of being able to forecast the future based on what happens in the past, and that is becoming harder and harder to do. And so I think the challenge for town government is how do we budget and plan for uncertainty, not for a new normal.
Right. Good point.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to point out is, the reserve fund balance. It really gets tremendously skewed by the ARPA.
Right.
Right, so ARPA was, Uncle Sam's generosity, it's an inheritance from Uncle Sam, or
Yeah.
that we could never plan on. So if you took the ARPA money out of the equation, it gives a more realistic
Yeah,
picture of what our balance is for, the reserve fund balance.
yeah, and I thought I took
You
that
did You
out.
did it for, the one bar chart, but you have the line chart that it's still in there, I think.
No, I should have explained that better, and I'll do that better next time, but this chart you're talking about, this one here,
Yeah,
and that actually does not include ARPA. And I'll make sure I call that out more clearly next week. Yep. Because I agree, it totally skews it. If I kept that in there, we'd be way over 1.8 million.
so this one confuses me. So we have $1.8 million in reserve funds. That doesn't sound right to me. And we put last year we put $500,000 to reserve, to reduce our budget, which came out of unassigned funds.
Unassigned funds, yep.
Much of that is,
So I mean, if you take the ARPA out of that 2.7 million, you're at like 1.5 in just these seven here.
Right, and if you throw in the tennis fund, it really,
I mean, that $8 in the tennis
Yeah.
fund is huge.
so,
But yeah, but I mean, that's, so yeah, I mean, that alone, these seven here are what? 1
so just
Five.
because they're reserve funds doesn't mean that you can spend them willy-nilly.
Right.
Like the cemetery fund has a lot of money in it, but it's not like we can go buy a boiler with that,
right.
or a police cruiser, or use it in, for.
oh, we can buy one of those things like the Ghostbusters drive.
Okay.
Yeah, an ectomobile.
Right. Each reserve is very, very
Very
limited and very
specific.
tied to the capital plan for the most part.
One of the things I'm hoping for with the records restoration fund is that we move towards digitizing some of our records.
Right.
And that would be a really good use of that.
And it would also make it easier for if we do have to move. If in a perfect world of Magic Fairy came down and digitized all our records, it would make dealing with the town center renovation much easier to cope
Much
with.
easier if we didn't have all the filing cabinets.
Not just the filing cabinets, but the vault, if all the land records were scanned.
Yeah, probably gonna always need the vault, but
We will, but it would be less, it would be something that would not be as critical if we could say it's all here too.
Yeah, it's online.
But I don't know
Well,
any
these are
Magic
back
Fairies who are
records.
coming down to do that.
Instead of paper records.
All right.
well, thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you all for the feedback. Appreciate it. And for your hard work on the budget since, September.
Well,
Yeah.
we should point out how many meetings we had relative to the budget. We
Right.
actually had many meetings.
We had at
Really,
least
extra meetings.
3 that were
Right.
just budget only.
And also our thanks to Connie, who could not be with us tonight. She's out on vacation this year.
Yeah, she's away this week.
Yeah, she's away,
She'll
but
be
she
here
had
next
put a
week,
lot of
though.
work into it. She will be here next week for town meeting. Rachel, you've just taken turned your camera on. Did you have a question?
No, I didn't. I'm just listening.
Okay. Lisa,
Okay, I don't know, but I don't think I got it on the agenda, but is it okay if I have leaflets to hand out at town meeting
about what?
about FEMA's long-term recovery group?
Oh,
Oh, absolutely.
That doesn't exist yet, but it won't unless we.
No, I mean, people can set up, several groups are gonna have tables there and be passed out brochures. I mean, MMC TV will,
Mhm, okay.
those references, so.
Lisa,
What's
thank you for
interesting,
getting that information. I should thank you for getting that information.
Well,
I greatly
I'm not sure what I've
appreciate
got myself into, but I guess I'll get pretty soon.
it. Well, thanks for volunteering.
It has the potential to drown me in work. So,
Yeah.
that doesn't scare me. It's just the longevity of it. But there are other groups in the state and particularly in Waterbury who are way ahead of us and they are actually helping people. And FEMA can still help people that need, house raising and so forth. There's a lot of help out there that people don't know about. So that's what we
What's interesting is that we cannot, we've got these really nice handouts that have questions, it has budget, it has site plan, it has floor plan, really nice information about the town center renovation. And we've learned that we cannot hand that out at town meeting because of
It being an Australian ballot item.
it being an Australian ballot item.
It's like advertising.
Well, it's advocating for one side or another in some sense, and the law has its opinions on whether you can do that. But Jeff, I think you've done a very good job with all the tours and information forums.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any remaining questions? We don't need to discuss items for next agenda because this was a special informational meeting.
Yep.
So if there are no other questions, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn made by Lisa Miller, seconded by Bart Hill. Please state your name and your vote.
Lisa,
Bart, aye.
Aye.
And Jay, aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.